Yeah. Cool. All right.
Let's get into it. The outreach workshop that I'm doing for you guys is relevant to the Cube of Truth. We are going to start right at the top. So the first part of this workshop is about veganism, because we have to get clear about what veganism actually means before we start talking about how to do outreach. Veganism, if you ask a group of people what it means, you'll get multiple versions of what they believe it to be. You probably had this experience just by interacting with vegans. You'll find that the definition that they hold dear to them is quite different for everybody. Veganism has nothing to do with our health. It has nothing to do with the environment. It has nothing to do with human rights. It has nothing to do with our affection towards animals. It is only about justice for non-human animals as far as it pertains to humans inflicting harm, exploitation, suffering, etc., upon non-human animals. So this is about addressing non-human animal exploitation at the hands of humans. In essence, to summarize, vegan equals anti-animal abuse. Activism, what does it mean? In essence, what it means is speaking up for the victims in the same way that you would want to be spoken for if you were in their position. It is being a medium of truth and enacting change by prioritizing the victims and not the oppressors. I recently made a post on social media, and the caption for that post summarizes, in essence, what we do on the streets and why we focus on what we focus on. Animal agriculture doesn't start with corporations. It doesn't start with the government. It doesn't even start with farms. It starts with you. It starts with the consumers who demand the products. And there's many different ways that you can create demand for animal exploitation. You may not necessarily purchase. It may be given to you. You may be wearing secondhand leather. Somebody might pay for your ticket to go to a zoo. There's many other circumstances I could point out, but you are creating demand and you're promoting that this culture of animal exploitation within humans is okay, it's acceptable. And that's what I mean by it starting with us, with humans. And what we do on the streets is we focus on the demand. We start from where it starts. And it's not to say that it isn't important to work in the political sphere to end things like government subsidies for animal agriculture. That is a worthy fight, and I would like to see that succeed. I would also like to see more of the direct action stuff that holds the corporations accountable. But what we also really need is to start from where it starts, which is the consumer demand. So that's why we do what we do. Always remember that you will never have 100% success rate in animal rights outreach. There is no magic set of words to use during outreach that will make someone go vegan. If they're ready, they'll listen. If they're not ready, they won't. This is a very important point for you guys to understand, because you might get down on yourself if you don't get through to somebody, and you may think that you've said everything correct, and you may have said it all correctly. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the individual and whether they're willing and open to change and take action. With the context provided, your function as an activist is to hold the individual you're speaking with accountable for the animal abuse that they are responsible for, and make them aware of the consequences of their choices. Your goal as an activist on the streets doing outreach at the Cubes is not to plant seeds. Animal rights outreach is not verbal leafleting. What we mean by that is you're not just riffing off information and factoids to people. You're not literally a brochure in human form. You're not just telling people about how old chickens are when they die, how many chickens are killed, etc. The whole point is you're actually interacting with somebody, and there are certain facts and information that need to be used at certain points throughout the interaction. But for the most part, most people prefer things to be kept simple. You might have heard the expression KISS, keep it simple, stupid. It really does apply to the majority of the public, especially when you're on the streets and people stop at a cube. You know, they're not usually looking for something that's too deep when they interact with you. Most people, in terms of digesting this information, will prefer for you to keep it simple and keep the statistics and the facts to a minimum. If the goal were to provide information, we would hand out leaflets and magazines and brochures. The function of outreach is to make people understand the consequences of their choices by holding them accountable and centering the interaction about what they can personally do about animal abuse on an individual level. Most people you speak with will try to deflect from accountability and palm this off to governments or corporations and say that they need to change. Or they might even start talking about other human beings and say, how are you going to get the whole world to become vegan though? These kinds of distractions that they bring up are all to deflect from accountability, individual accountability. So it's your job as an activist to bring it back to the individual. Veganism is not about love or compassion. You can dislike animals and you are still obligated to be vegan in the same way that it applies to humans. You can hate people, but you don't have the right to enslave, torture, and murder them. Veganism is about justice. Your likability does not determine your rights. So outreach is not about how you or anyone else feels about animals necessarily. If you don't go around beating children, you aren't instantly a compassionate individual. If you don't go around abusing animals on the streets, you're not necessarily a compassionate person. Refraining from injustice does not make you compassionate by default. Veganism is a non-action. Therefore, it's not loving, it's merely the right thing to do, the sane and rational thing to do. This approach that I'm teaching you is about pure honesty. Telling someone the truth is the most respectful thing that you can do for them. When you agree with every statement said by the bystander, they will often lose respect for you and you will lose control of the conversation. When you do this, they see that your desire to be validated by them is stronger than your desire to end animal cruelty and the whole reason why you're standing out on the streets trying to engage with the public, thereby making a mockery of animal rights. Can you imagine if the primary goal of human rights activists was to be liked by the oppressors? In any other context, this would be insane. You may be hesitant to speak boldly. Whenever you are afraid to speak up for the animals directly, or if bystanders call you too extreme, place yourself in the victim's position and analyze your approach from their perspective. Could you look a cow in the eyes and say, I'm doing my best on your behalf? I'm speaking for you as if I was in your position. Would you consider a respectful yet direct conversation too extreme if you were locked up in a slaughterhouse right now? Don't talk about health and environment. This is obviously a huge thing in the animal rights movement. Vegans so often talk about human health and the environment with an aim to hook people in to becoming vegan. And we tell ourselves, it doesn't matter how we get people to go vegan, just as long as they go vegan. The problem with this idea is that more often than not, it's a myth that these people actually go vegan. And if they do become plant-based, what they end up doing is becoming the worst kind of candidate for a vegan, because they are the type of vegans to rub veganism through the mud on the basis of doing it for their health or for the environment, both of which are human-centric. It's still a selfish message that you're promoting, which is completely beside the point. And not the basis for veganism. The whole point of veganism is altruism, doing something for non-human animals. Non-human animals deserve to have a cause dedicated to them. And so when we promote animal rights, it should be about animal rights. Why do we think people care about either their health or the environment? Most people in the streets do not care about their health nor the environment. So rooting out outreach in these topics will marginalize the animals. Health and environment have become exacerbated because people do not take animal abuse seriously. Trying to hook people with an approach that revolves around what benefits them does a disservice to the animals. So focus on the root cause of the issue, the animal abuse. Whenever people talk about how badly our environment is affected by animal agriculture, whether it's someone who is vegan or non-vegan talking about these points, and by the way, most non-vegans already know about how bad animal agriculture is for the environment. Why do they know about this? There are so many victims involved in this injustice that it does in fact impact the environment. So the root cause of this issue is animal abuse. And so it makes no sense to talk about the symptom and to make this, again, a selfish message for humans to benefit from. Why don't people care about ethics? Because vegans don't advocate for animals correctly. They focus on things like plant-based recipes, restaurants, weight loss, or deforestation. Another reason is they lead with phrases like friends, not food, or animal lovers don't eat animals. This is not a conversation about sympathy. This is a conversation about accountability. Don't plead with bystanders. Make them understand the consequences of their choices by placing them in the victim's position. Morality when it comes to this injustice, and injustice in general, you can say, but especially when it comes to this injustice, is black and white. If bystanders tell you that you aren't considering the other side to this, or that you aren't open-minded enough, that is a distraction. There is no other side to needless animal abuse. You either support it or you don't. Don't get lost in these distractions. Compare animal abuse to a comparable injustice and get it back on track. When you're comparing animal abuse to another injustice, we've found that the best thing to do is to compare it to them. Put the bystander in that cow's position. How would you feel if your babies were being stolen from you after you were raped and you had your neck sliced open? What I found is that most people mostly care about themselves. You know, they're not really going to understand unless they imagine for themselves what it would be like if they were in that position, if we want them to connect to what animals are going through. Which injustice should you compare to? I just touched on this a little bit, but we'll get further into it. It is most effective to compare to injustices such as child abuse or human trafficking, but even better, the most effective is to place the bystander in the victim's position. Avoid dog comparisons. This goes back to not leading with compassion. It's not about the love that people feel towards animals. It's about the hate that they feel towards injustice. I can't tell you how many times I've personally learned this lesson about using dogs as a comparison. And people will say, yeah, well, if I was in China, I would eat dogs. Here's the thing. Most people don't view dogs truly as individuals. One indication of that in our society is that we have dog shelters that kill dogs by the thousand. And so again, most people mostly only care about themselves. It doesn't come down to whether you can imagine your dog in a slaughterhouse. It comes down to whether you can imagine yourself in a slaughterhouse. Statistics, keep them minimal. Outside of what is asked of you, state minimal information during outreach conversations. We are not on the streets to verbally leaflet. Let the footage provide the context to the conversation. You aren't at a cube of truth to be a statistician. You're there to have a concise conversation that holds people to account for their unjustified animal abuse. A conversation will go on for longer than necessary if it turns into an argument over statistics. And it's not to say that we can't win these debates. We can. We have logic and facts, reason. But what they're usually doing is they're trying to deflect from accountability. They're trying to distract the conversation so that they don't have to take action. So you have to understand that before you entertain any of those points. This is another reason why you shouldn't bring up health and environment talking points. And this is something I've learned time and time again. When I do bring up health and environment, if I entertain those points, and I know that sometimes it can be tempting, super tempting, you will end up debating how much iron you get as a vegan or whatever the case may be. All of it is just a distraction to what really needs to be discussed. Not everybody on the streets is worth talking to. Part of your role is to assess who is reachable and who is not. Many people are not reachable. This is a numbers game. I've had cubes where I've had 0 people take the issue seriously over the course of 3 or 4 hours. It's par for the course. I've had cubes where almost every person I spoke to was open and willing, and they got it. Plenty of those people that are open and worth talking to are out there. I also will say that even if somebody doesn't get it and you've said the correct thing on behalf of the animals, it is still worthwhile, because you never know what kind of an effect what you've said will have on that person's subconscious. And you never know how that may come up again within them in future. If they want to have a short conversation with you, keep it short with them. Don't entertain bystanders who want to engage in long argumentative debates. Do not underestimate the cunningness of non-vegan guilt and the ability that many non-vegans will have to waste your vital time at work for the animals. If people don't take this issue seriously, expect that they will want to waste your time. They may even seem sincere and nice. They may seem like very sweet people. But if they don't take this issue seriously, they may just take you for a ride and waste your time. When people feel guilty, and most people you speak with by and large will feel guilty, when their guilt flares up, they will have all of these mechanisms that come up to protect themselves or to defend themselves and to justify their guilt. And that's what we mean by the cunningness of non-vegan guilt. You shouldn't underestimate it. You should understand that it's a very real thing, and it will cause humans to behave in very irrational ways. I've never seen people act more irrationally than I have with non-vegans when we address this issue with them. So again, activism is not sales. Sales training does not equal good activism. Using slick talk to trick people into veganism does not work. Your job is to hold the bystander accountable. It's up to them which actions they take. Initially, AV made too strong of a connection between sales and activism. Tools taught in sales training only go so far. So this is why I'm making such a strong point about the sales stuff. It's because back in 2016, when we put together the model for the Cube of Truth and the outreach element to the Cube, I did actually make too strong of a connection between sales and activism. So this was back in 2016 that I did this. And I essentially called what I was bringing to the table a value-based sales approach. And when I said a value-based sales approach, I was intending on differentiating from the general regular form of sales that people are commonly used to. Value-based, meaning there is no money involved here. However, what this did is it created this idea that if you have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of sales experience, that you're automatically experienced as an activist. And that's just not how this works at all. In fact, what I've found is, and I've personally done sales for well over 10 years, is a lot of what I learned is not actually applicable. Most of what I learned is not applicable in activism whatsoever. In fact, a lot of the little tools that we did bring over into activism we no longer really use. It's just good to understand how certain aspects of sales work. I just shared one thing with you guys, which is KISS, keep it simple, stupid. I'm not even sure if that belongs to the sales world, but that's where I learned it. And it applies to almost everything in life. And in essence, at its very basis, sales applies to life. You know, if you have children and they love to eat confectionery every day for every meal, convincing them to eat a carrot is sales. I'm convincing you right now to take this approach seriously and to follow this protocol while you're at Cubes of Truth. But my point is that it can get blown out of proportion. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean everything that you've learned in sales is applicable in activism. A successful conversation is not one where the bystander says, I'm going vegan. It's where you say the right things. This is really important. Again, like I was saying before, some people may not seem open and willing. They may not give you the answer that you're looking for. When people say I'm going vegan, that's obviously a good indication, but they may just be excited in the moment. They may not be genuine about that. The best way to measure whether you've had a good interaction is to look at what you've said. Have you said the correct thing on behalf of the animals or not? If you have, you've done the best that you can possibly do. Most people become vegan after they hear the truth from us. How long it takes is up to the individual. The Socratic Method. Just by show of hands, how many of you don't know about the Socratic Method? Okay, there's a few of you. So Socratic Method, it's named after Socrates. And essentially what he taught was when you're in a debate with somebody, and this is more of a debate tactic, so that's why it's not applicable in its entirety to an outreach conversation, because the whole thing isn't necessarily a debate. The whole thing is an interaction that will involve some parts of it being a debate. And so what he taught was, instead of framing something as a statement, in this context, for example, animal cruelty is wrong, right? That's a statement. The better way to frame it is as a question. What do you think about animal cruelty? Do you think that animal cruelty is wrong? Or how do you feel about animal cruelty? So one of those variations was a closed question and two of them was an open-ended question. We'll get into the open-ended questions in this slide. Socratic questioning is a communication tool that we use within our approach. It is not an approach in and of itself, where we ask questions to lead the bystander to their own conclusions. Use open-ended questions such as, why are you against animal abuse? Instead of a closed statement such as, animal abuse is wrong. Open-ended questions are generally preferred to anchor and progress the conversation. You should use closed-ended questions and statements also, but usually an open-ended question does a better job. Sometimes you just need to seal off and confirm an aspect of what it is that you're discussing at that particular moment, and that's where the closed-ended questions are important. Okay, this is important. You versus we. We don't torture and kill animals for products non-vegans do. Using we undermines individual accountability. This has been a personal lesson for me and something that we've all learned within AV for quite some time now. But essentially what we do as activists is we find ourselves saying we with non-vegans all the time. Why do we do this to animals? You know, we grow up, I know that we're trying to relate to non-vegans, but it does take away from individual accountability, and people do need to understand the clear difference between veganism and non-veganism, and they will not see and understand that difference clearly enough if you keep using language that isn't accurately describing the issue. If you keep saying we, you're not actually being accurate. So be careful about what it is you're saying. When you tell non-vegans that we as a society are responsible for animal cruelty in farms, it takes away the imperative for individual accountability. It makes them think of lobbying or government programs instead of personal responsibilities. People need to feel guilty to change. They'll only change once they understand that there is a difference between you, the vegan, and them, the non-vegan. I understand that last slide might seem like we are creating division between us and individuals. It's not about being deliberately combative and creating division with people. It's, again, just about making sure that they understand clearly that there is a massive difference between veganism and non-veganism. And I think you all already know this, because otherwise you wouldn't be vegan and you wouldn't stay vegan. And you understand that there is a big difference between what you're doing now and going back to being non-vegan, a huge difference. And that's why we should really be careful about the language we use. Okay, why versus how? People already know how to go vegan. It's really simple stuff. With the constant availability of Google and the internet, anybody can figure out how to become vegan instantly. In order for people to feel the need to become vegan, they need to be held accountable for why they should do it. With any other injustice, you would never focus on how by talking about how to not participate in the violence. Focusing on the how in the context of any other injustice would be an insult to the victims and the entire movement fighting to end their oppression. Pardon me. It's not to say that how is not an important talking point. We should give people that, but it's only at the very end, once we have sufficiently and emphatically addressed the why factor. You know, we give people a card, as you know, at the end. We always arm people with the resources and the how factor. All you really need as a compass to be vegan is what I'm doing right now vegan or not? Does this restaurant have vegan meals? Is this product vegan? Is this ingredient vegan? Is going to zoos vegan? Okay, so it's really simple, really, really simple stuff. And I think that you should be aware of whether you're coddling people into this or not. And babying people into this is a problem. It shows weakness in the actual message if you're doing that. Vegetarianism is cancer to animal rights. I'm not just saying this for shock value. I truly mean this. The longer that vegetarianism and veganism get conflated, the longer it will take for us to get the message out there that veganism is about non-human animal rights, and that is a serious injustice that people need to take very, very seriously. Vegetarians are non-vegans and should be outreached in the same manner as anyone else. And in most cases, even harder. Vegetarians are our target market. They're no different to paleo eaters, people who eat a paleo diet. Why should we treat them any differently? So as you may know, people who eat a paleo diet do not eat dairy. And we as vegans, I use this point a lot, and I hear other vegans using this point a lot. We talk about how the dairy industry is quite possibly the cruelest industry, at least for land animals, on Earth. Paleo eaters don't consume any dairy products. Why are they any different to vegetarians? Vegetarians don't consume flesh. While flesh is an obvious form of cruelty, we know as vegans that dairy is no different, and that what happens on dairy farms and in slaughterhouses to the cows and their babies is nothing short of an atrocity, of a Holocaust, and is no different to what happens to animals in the meat industry. Arguably, it's worse in the dairy industry. And so, as you can imagine, it would be insane for us to call paleo people our allies, to put them in the same bracket as vegans. So why are we doing this with vegetarians? It makes absolutely no sense. It's counterproductive, and it absolutely will marginalize the seriousness of this injustice the longer that we make vegetarians feel like they are animal people, like they are defenders of animals, like they are on the side of animal rights. They need to be held to account just like everybody else. Okay, so they are not allies. Don't let other vegans or non-vegans manipulate you into thinking that they are. So when you start the conversation, you could say, would you like to know why we're here? Or you could ask, have you ever seen this kind of footage before, to start the conversation? And with the context of the footage playing, tell them what the Cube of Truth sets out to do. What we are here doing is showing the reality of what happens to animals in the meat, dairy, and egg industries, and also other industries that exploit animals. Everything you see here is standard practice here and around the world. Ask the following open-ended question: what are your feelings on animal abuse? Then confirm their stance to form moral consistency with something like, so is it safe to say that you are against animal abuse? By the way, most people will say yes. It's very rare that you'll get anybody that says no to that question. Ask them, do you think it's possible to be against animal abuse while demanding products like meat, dairy, and eggs? And this is where the truth starts to set in, and most people say, that's a really good question, or their objections start to come out. Ask them, what is stopping them from not abusing animals and becoming vegan? What do you feel like would be stopping you? And this is important that you say, what do you feel like would be stopping you? Not what is stopping you. Because there, as you know, there is nothing stopping anybody from going vegan, really, if you live in a modern society. What do you feel like would be stopping you from not abusing animals and being vegan? It's also important that you mention not abusing animals and being vegan, and not just saying, what do you feel like would be stopping you from being vegan? It's much more powerful to add in the fact that you're not abusing animals when you're not vegan. This will lead to their objections. Objection handling. Whenever a bystander brings up an objection, place them in the victim's position and allow them to analyze the objection from that perspective. Every single time this happens, the objection will fall apart. As long as they're being genuine, they're not being disingenuous intellectually, no matter what the objection is, it always crumbles. Most objections are easy and quick to respond to. Some are more nuanced and require a deeper explanation, but they should still be quick to respond to. Your response should always anchor back to individual accountability. It should always end up with the bystander you're speaking with being in the hot seat. If it doesn't end up with that bystander being in the hot seat, you aren't anchoring that point that you've just made correctly. It has to always end there. Bring it back to the individual. If they try to create excuses that try to remove accountability, for example, pointing to rural communities, lions, low-income families, etc., don't get lost in lengthy explanations. Again, these things are distractions. Bring it back to the individual by placing themselves in the victim's position and asking how that excuse justifies their personal responsibility to animal abuse. I need to update these slides, to be completely honest. Contribution and support aren't the correct words to use here. People aren't merely contributing to the animal holocaust. They're literally responsible for it. I'm going to give you an example. If a hunter's wife is at home and before the hunter goes out to have a day of hunting, the wife says, "Have a great day hunting, honey." She's supporting hunting, but she's not actually shooting the animals herself. Non-vegans aren't merely doing that. Non-vegans are quite literally responsible for the shooting, for the enslavement, for the torture, and the murder. So contribution and support are not accurate words to be using here. Responsibility is the word to replace those words in all cases. Tie in the benefit. Tie in the benefit only once they concede by saying, if they're against animal abuse, then it's not possible to be against animal abuse while being responsible for it. The number one benefit for being vegan, the benefit is that they no longer have to be tortured and abused because of you. In other words, you no longer have to be the reason that animals suffer in the worst unimaginable ways. For you as an individual, If you say that you're against animal abuse and what you see on the screens, then when you're vegan, you no longer have to be a hypocrite. Now, this is the part of the interaction where things get very real and where the person understands that you're not just having a wishy-washy, you're not just verbally leafleting, you're not just saying what vegans tend to say, you're having a real conversation about a real issue here. And you're calling them out, but you're not doing it because you are trying to be an asshole. You also should understand that telling somebody the truth is the most compassionate thing that you can do. It's the most kind and loving thing that you can do. Sometimes the truth can be harsh and can sound brutal, but you have to understand that that's just the nature of truth. The truth is not always a bowl of cherries. And when you're a medium of truth, you have to accept that as part of your responsibility when you're spreading the truth. You have to be comfortable with the fact that sometimes it will sound brutal, but you're not saying it from a malicious place. Your intention is to end animal abuse and to change the actions of humans so that they are no longer responsible for it. In a way, it's liberating for the human as well as the animal who they are responsible for oppressing. This drives home the accountability and makes them understand the consequences of their choices. So this is where you close the conversation. Always end every outreach conversation by asking what the individual will be personally doing to take action. Ask the open-ended question after our conversation, what are you going to do about this injustice? After a long conversation, they may still say that they'll only reduce or do nothing, or they may say something like, I'll try to do better. If you can sense that the interaction will keep going in circles, end the conversation with a statement. But with people who say, I'm going to try to do better, or I'll reduce how much meat I eat, they are still not getting how serious this is. Do you deem this to be an injustice? And usually they will say, yes, I do. And then I say, would you take the stance that you just took with any other injustice? You know, if we were talking about yourself as the victim in this injustice, would you find it acceptable for your oppressor to say that they are going to try to stop oppressing you? Or would you only deem it acceptable for them to stop immediately? Again, they may not like the sound of that. It may not be what they want to hear, because essentially what they're doing when they say I'm going to try or reduce is they're pandering to you because they want to tell you what you want to hear. They can see that they're on the wrong side of this. That's why they're saying these things to you, to end the conversation. You become a mirror at that point for the ugliness that they represent. And when you say that their stance is not acceptable, regardless of what they say after that, you've put the needle where it needs to be. An effective statement in this situation can be, and this is the last line that we always give people, we tend to leave them with this. So keep in mind that for however long that you're not vegan, animals will be abused and tortured because of you. So when you're ready to stop abusing animals and align your actions with your words, you know what to do. Think about what side of history you want to stand on. And that's the workshop, guys. So was there any part of that didn't make sense to you guys? If so, let me know and I'm happy to cover it. No? Made sense to all of you?
Yes, pretty clear.
One hand's gone up.
Can you hear us?
I think I can hear you. Just speak loudly and I should hear you fine.
Yeah. I've seen this topic come up a lot on the internet about how veganism is about all form of animal abuse, not only non-human abuse. And this is a topic that comes up a lot, how even being vegan, we can support some products that cause some form of animal abuse, being human and non-human abuse. And in the slide, you say it's purely non-human animal activism.
Yep. You want me to expand on that?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, so how many issues would you say of abuse would there be within humans? How many human injustices are there in the world?
Countless.
Countless, right? The list would be endless, wouldn't it?
And I
So-
understand, yeah, this movement is really focusing on the non-human aspect of things, and this
Yeah.
I don't hide, but it's only in the definition of veganism being only for non-human animals. Is just this I don't fully agree on the definition of vegan, but I agree on the objective of AV. That's the only thing I want to say.
Okay, so is that a question, or are you just saying that you disagree?
Yeah, it's more that I disagree on the definition of vegan, I suppose.
Okay, well, would you agree with someone walking up to a feminism rally and saying, "What about gay rights?"
I mean, I think it's not the place to talk about it, I suppose.
Yeah, because there is a movement that should be dedicated to women, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So in the same way, there should be a movement dedicated to non-human animals, right?
yeah, I agree.
So even within the human context, you agree that there shouldn't be overlapping causes, that each cause, like gay people should have a cause for them. So
Yes.
they shouldn't have their movement conflated with homelessness and other issues because it takes away from the seriousness of their cause. And so you understand that already, but why does it end when it comes to non-human animals?
I think the point Jan's trying to make is that we are a vegan organisation, yet the definition of vegan does include humans, essentially, is what people are trying to say, that, you know, we've got to sort out human rights as well, we've got to worry about humans as well. Whereas AV, we definitely, and other animal rights groups, hopefully, but certainly AV, concentrate purely on non-human animals. Does that mean that there's some sort of conflict then? Should we be saying AV, well, we're a vegan organisation, or we're an animal rights organisation? Maybe that's the difference, you know, just between just purely a definition. We're talking about veganism a lot, but then every now and again they're saying, well, but how about human rights? You know, because humans are animals too. So I think that's more the point that Jan's trying to make.
Yeah, well, we started with the definition of veganism. Veganism is for non-human animals. It pertains to the exploitation and the harm and suffering that humans inflict on non-human animals. So I'm just going by the actual definition of the word.
Yeah, I just heard many like different definitions of the words. That's why, yeah, my concern was about the definition of the word. But I've heard virus.
So if the word, the definition of the word vegan is that it's for non-human animals, that's all we need really to clarify. If people want to ask us, well, how about humans? Well, then we'll just tell them the actual definition of the word, which is on the first slide. So I guess that's
Just think about
not up for debate, really.
just think about what it is that is being suggested here. If we were to couple non-human animal rights with human rights, like I said, how many issues are there within the scope of human rights? It's endless, endless. So
For the outreach, yeah, I agree that our outreach is only for non-human animals. Yeah, that's the mission of AV. Yeah.
Well, it should be the mission of every animal rights organisation, but AV is the only one that actually stays true to this message, which is for non-human animals. Unfortunately, it is conflated with human or all animal rights. And if you want to lump humans in, well, we are animals, but as Paul's saying, there are plenty, I mean, untold movements that are fighting against human injustices. This is just the one, and AV seems to be the one that kind of stays true to that, and that's why there's controversy over that.
And look, I'll just, yeah, we're talking about AV in terms of activism and stuff, but I am just referring to the definition of vegan is like the word vegan belongs to non-human animals. To lump it in with human rights is a huge disservice to the animals. Again, because human rights is such a long list of issues. And so are you really suggesting that we would put all of those issues in with addressing the non-human animal holocaust? That is already a mountain to climb in and of itself. And what I've noticed within my own experience as an activist is that I've been doing this for 5 years on the streets and overseeing groups in 1,000 cities. And I'm only now starting to find my groove as an activist. It takes time to master your craft. And so if I was out there on the streets focusing on human rights as well, I would be nowhere near as proficient and understanding of this issue as I am now. Nowhere near, not even close. And so I think that there should be humans dedicated to this.
I think if we go back to the original definition as coined by Donald Watson, it was about, he didn't specifically say non-human animals, he said animals, correct? Have I got that right? And then the Vegan Society, a few years later, kind of they slightly changed the wording and had people start to believe that this was an intersectional issue and started broadening this statement to include all animals, human and non-human, and that's where the problem came in. But exactly what you're saying, animals being, it's for animals. Back then in the 40s when he coined the phrase, it wasn't, he wasn't differentiating between, he didn't need to make the statement to go non-human or human animals. He just knew this was about animals.
It also makes no sense to even presume that it was for humans as well as non-humans, because there are so many issues that fall under the scope of human rights injustices. It's an insane proposition to say that this is a movement to end all human rights injustices as well as non-human rights. What are you supposed to work on? There's a long list that doesn't end of injustices that you would have to focus on.
But don't forget also that there's a huge list of organisations fighting for human rights. I mean, people are fighting for human rights, just even within schools and, in courts and governments. It's everywhere. Everyone cares about human rights. So why should we, dilute the message that we have and include human rights into that?
Yeah. All right. Does anybody have any other questions?
I wanted to ask you about what would you say to a politician regarding subsidies? What would you write to them, or if you meet up with them, what would you say?
I don't know. That's not my forte.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'd say something along the lines of make it happen. That's it. But I don't know how to play that game.
Right. Me neither.
So the guy behind you had a question. Yes.
Yeah. At the start, you were talking about planting seeds, and the AV wasn't about planting seeds. But then later on towards the end, you talked about how people will get there at their own pace. So isn't that the opposite?
That's actually a good point. What we mean to say is, generally the way that planting seeds is perceived in the animal rights movement is, let's just say a bunch of stuff, like a bunch of information about, animal agriculture and, deforestation and the environment and health points. And then we've planted seeds, therefore. And so what we're really taking issue with there is planting seeds in the way that the term is used in the animal rights movement. But if we're getting technical about it, we are planting a seed in their minds. So perhaps we need to update that in the slides So yeah, that's a good point you're making. Technically, you're correct. We are essentially saying what we need to say on behalf of the animals, and then the rest is up to the individual. So I guess you could say that's planting a seed.
If you go into those conversations with the intention of planting the seed, you're only ever going to plant a seed. And that's what you're insinuating to not do, isn't it? So we want to go straight in the message that this is what we expect, and we expect the cessation of all animal use immediately, because at least we're aiming for what we want and not accepting anything less. But ideally, they walk away and they plant the street, we have to accept that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in reality, we can't force people to become vegan. It would be a lot easier if we could. And so we do have to just say what we need to say on behalf of the animals, and the rest is up to the individual. So in essence, yes, technically, yes, we are planting seeds, but I think you just said it perfectly there, Calvin. You shouldn't go in.
Yeah, I think what else happens when you're on outreach and you've had a conversation with someone and they've walked away, you feel like they've got the message, but they haven't agreed on the spot, or they haven't kind of gone away saying, yeah, this is something I'm going to do, but I'm going to go away and think about what you've said and I'm going to look into it. I think some people will, you know, I've spoken to outreachers that have gone, well, at least I planted a seed, and that can kind of make someone feel like, well, I did the best job that I could do at the time, and so therefore I'm feeling like that was a success for me. You know, if you hear a lot of people saying, I planted a seed, sort of during the queue, and if they feel that they've delivered the message in the best way that they possibly could, then perhaps that the idea that they've planted a seed is enough for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think that whilst doing outreach, if they just merely exist as someone who's vegan in front of a non-vegan, and they just simply say certain things, like I said before, about like certain factoids about animal agriculture, that means that we're planting a seed, you know. But that's what we're trying to steer away from when we address that in the slides. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question? Yep. Okay. Cool. Any other questions? Yes.
I don't know if it's a question or a, because I've heard you say a lot that vegetarians are like cancer of the vegan movement.
Vegetarianism,
sorry. But yeah, I was kind of upset because I was vegetarian my whole life, and I would never have thought of eating an animal or hurting an animal, or meat was disgusting, like that whole thing. So I was always kind of upset when I heard that, because what's about the animals.
okay.
But then when the way you explained it tonight sort of changed my mind, because when you put it into terms of the paleo diet, kind of sunk into where I'm going, okay, it made a bit more sense. So it kind of helped tonight. Yeah, when you compare it to paleo, so well, they're not doing dairy, but they're eating meat. How come the other way around is not, there's no difference? So it kind of made a lot of sense, and sort of hit home that, yeah, that helped.
All right, I'll take that. Yeah, look, when you were vegetarian, were you doing it because you didn't want to be responsible for animal abuse?
Yeah, I was brought up vegetarian, so from my whole life. But it was when I was a little kid, my dad, when I was pestering him because I wanted a burger, he said, well, okay, well, if you want to eat chicken or whatever, you have to get a chicken and you have to kill it. And you have to do all that, you can eat it. That's the growth of it. Of course, I didn't want to do that. I love animals. So it would never come to my head that I'm going to kill an animal and eat it. It's just so crazy. But
Okay.
I would drink it, or I'd eat the eggs. Or, so I never understood what happened in order for me to get it.
I understand. So did you know what happened in the dairy and the egg industries?
No, it was Dom's fault that I found out. Yeah.
And so there are those vegetarians out there who didn't know better, and once they do know better, they become vegan instantly. I would say those people are actually vegans who didn't know better and therefore just needed to have that push. until they made the correct choices to become vegan and to actualize their veganism. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I think the way you explained it tonight is really good because it kind of makes clear sense. Well, before I've heard it, but I didn't have that connection between the paleo and the veggie.
Yeah, cool.
I think it's fairly clear that vegetarians are kind of the low-hanging fruit when it comes to, in a lot of ways, when it comes to convincing people to go vegan. Like majority of vegetarians I don't know, and I was one of them for 25 years. I was vegetarian for the animals, but I was, still very much not ready to hear the rest of the argument, even though I was told it for probably several years. I wasn't prepared to change my ways, until I finally just got the push to do it. But, I still consider myself low-hanging fruit. I just didn't have a strong enough argument put to me. Crazy as it is. It wasn't until I saw the images, there it was in front of me. It just wasn't enough to actually hear the story.
Yeah. And that's a good point about low-hanging fruit. I think most vegans consider vegetarians low-hanging fruit, and that's why we give them a pass. And I shouldn't say we, I should say those vegans who do that. I don't do this anymore. What I've found in my experience is that most vegetarians are pompous. They think they're already doing enough, and how dare you tell them any different? And when you're trying to convince them to become vegan, they're in fact harder to speak to than other non-vegans are to speak with. So I had to correct you when you said vegetarians, because I don't necessarily know the individual vegetarian that we're speaking about. I just know that vegetarianism as a concept is cancerous. And what it leads to is people thinking they're animal defenders whilst not being responsible for one form of animal abuse, while being responsible for every other form of needless animal abuse that is out there. And that makes zero sense. And in fact, a lot of vegetarians also add more dairy and eggs to their diet to make up for the flesh they're not eating, to get more protein perhaps. And so they end up committing just as much cruelty, arguably more cruelty, because there's more cruelty arguably in the dairy industry. It just makes no sense whatsoever to consider vegetarians to be on the same side as vegans, or to have that slash between vegetarians and vegans. That's completely marginalizing the seriousness of what is happening to the animals.
Yeah, and for most vegetarians, probably you as well, that we're just talking about a diet here. I was a leather wearing vegetarian. Most vegetarians I know are still wearing the skins of animals and feathers and the rest of it. So it was only about what goes into their mouths.
Yeah.
So if people that we're talking to, if we can establish that they do care and that they think that what they see is vulgar and they want to make the world different and ease the suffering, but yet they still don't want to do it. What is the reason? Because you suggested at the end that we close with what is the thing that's stopping you from becoming vegan today? And I've asked this question a lot, and I always get the same answer, which is not sure and walk away.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
What is stopping people from being vegan? Because I've been doing AV for a while now, maybe 2 years, and I'm not sure what it is.
Let me just get the lighting down here because it's quite dark. There we go. That's a little bit better, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. What do I think is stopping people from actually being vegan after they say they care about non-human animal rights? Is that the question? Okay. I think if I was to just give you one answer, I think it's because society has done a real number on people. And you could just look at your own life and you could probably see how much human supremacy you've been programmed into. The other day, I saw a bird dying in the middle of the road, and I was the only one who pulled over and tried to help the bird. And I was only able to be there with the bird for the last 15 minutes of this bird's life. And I witnessed this bird take its last breaths. And it was a very sobering experience for me. But I couldn't help but think hours later that if that was a human child that I found in the middle of the road, even myself as an animal rights activist to this day, I would be more affected by that experience. Society has done such a good job at convincing human beings that we are the most important, most valuable, most special animal on this planet. It's very easy to agree that animal abuse is wrong. But then will you take this seriously enough to take action and to make change in your life? Well, that comes down to your character. Are you willing to break through your programming? Are you willing to question your programming and to work against it, to reprogram your mind? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but then I guess my follow-up question would be then, so then what do I do? Because it's not, I can't reprogram somebody. If all I can do is present them with the information, and then
all you can do is hold them accountable, and should they take those steps to be accountable, because they can only hold themselves accountable at the end of the day, all you can do is tell them the truth, and the rest lies on them. And this is why it's so important for us to tell people the truth and nothing but the truth, because that's the best chance we have at driving someone towards individual accountability and changing their actions.
it's just that, sorry to take up so much time, it's just that this happens a lot.
Yeah.
And you can, and sometimes I get the feeling like, am I making any difference? So that's how sometimes I feel. It's because it's time and time and time again. You put a lot of effort into it, and it takes an emotional toll on you to be talking with strangers, and sometimes it's time again. So, but I want to be a better activist, so it makes me feel like I'm doing something wrong.
So remember how I said during the workshop, during the presentation, that this is a numbers game? The more you persevere, the more you will find people who will be more open to changing, more willing to take action than others are. And they're out there. And the only way you'll know that is if you persevere. And this is the thing, you will never know what happens after the interaction you have with them. So, during the conversation, they will seem like they've got a wall between you and them, or between themselves and the truth. You put the issue on the table initially. So you never know how far this goes. Again, like what you were saying with planting seeds.
What you can do, sorry, Paul, I guess what you can, you're wondering what we can do as outreaches. If you think that they're not quite getting the message or whatever, you just work on your outreach. That's all we've got. We've just got to do the best we can for the animals. And every time that I've had an outreach experience that hasn't been quite so good, I just thought I just missed an opportunity there to do something great for the animals. And that's the most important thing, is that we get the message across, concise message, really accurate message. So just keep working on your outreach, and I think you'll feel a lot better at the end of each conversation if you know you've given it your best, you've studied up, and then how whether they take it or not is up to them. But and you'll know in your heart that you've given it the absolute best shot for those animals.
Very well said, Calvin. Very well said. It just comes down to that. It really, you do your best. The best you can do is say the correct thing on behalf of the animals. And I will be completely honest and forthright with the fact that, in the beginnings, and Dom, you'll know this, from the beginning stages of AV to where we're at now, our approach was different. We used to say things that would get more of an agreeable response from people, that we would then mark down as a tally. Yes, we got that person to go vegan. And that, made us feel good. But by and large, we were bullshitting. We were bullshitting to ourselves. So now we're just being honest. And we know that the only real thing that we have an influence over is what we say, how we say what we say and what we say. And working on that is the whole game. That's all you can do. And trying, working on ways to improve what you say is the work that we have before us. The rest is entirely upon the individual that you speak with.
I honestly think that feeling confident with this outreach approach is absolutely key. If you go in feeling you've got a lack of confidence, you want to hold people accountable, but you're not feeling confident with doing that, that's going to come through. And then you're going to start throwing out information and statistics and blah, 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 and it gets lost on people. They start to shut down, and they start saying things that are either going to be kind of keeping you happy, and you end up in these crazy long conversations, which is going to lead me to my question. These stupidly long conversations where you find yourself sort of trying to fight your way out of a corner that they've kind of pushed you into. Things just start getting out of hand. But if you can just feel confident with holding people accountable, holding them personally responsible, as opposed to throwing information at them, you're going to come out winning, no matter what, whether they get it on the spot, or they get it down the track, or they don't get it at all, they just weren't open to it. I think you've got to just stay true to this. We've tried so many different forms of outreach through AV. This is the one that works.
Believe that.
Yeah.
We have said it all and done it all in terms of outreach. I've learned from the best. I'm still getting mentoring from Gary Yourofsky, who I think is the greatest to ever do it. Okay, I've learned from him. And by the way, with the vegetarian thing, I just want to say, I learned from his experience about how he went vegan, that what actually got him to become vegan was someone holding him to account, for his hypocrisy. After that happened, he went vegetarian because he didn't understand the difference between vegetarian and vegan. But I still say that he went vegan that day purely because of that. He didn't understand the difference. Had he had known the dairy industry and the egg industry and all these other industries were just the same as the meat industry, he would have identified, well, he did identify as vegan actually, but he would have actually been vegan from that moment. It wasn't until someone said you're a hypocrite because you're talking about all these other animal rights injustices, but you eat animal products, so you're a hypocrite. And that's when he became vegan. And I want to understand what causes the greatest animal rights activists in the world to become vegan, because our goal is not necessarily get someone to just become vegan. We want them to also fight to end this with us. We want them to join the fight, right? And we ideally would like them to be some of the greatest animal rights activists that ever walk this earth. And so I want to understand how the greatest activists went vegan as a starting point to learn exactly how we should be speaking to others about this. And, the truth is very powerful. It's the most powerful weapon that we have in this entire fight. You will experience many people who will take action, who will listen and do what we are wanting for people to do at the end of the interaction you have with them. It may not happen as quickly as we would like it to happen, but if the end goal is to create vegans and animal rights activists who take this issue just as seriously as we do and fight along with us, then this is the way that we have to play it. This is bittersweet because a lot of the people that you speak with will not do anything with this information. And so when we cover in the workshop about who you should be speaking to, that's also part of this. Know that when you're speaking to a brick wall, that you should end the conversation. You should wrap it up and move on to the next person. Respect your time when you're talking to people. Respect your psychological energy, which you only have a limited amount of. Respect your time on the streets, which you only have a very limited time of. 3 hours a week that's not a lot of time to be speaking to people. So I sure as shit don't want to spend 20 minutes talking to someone who's just wasting my time, who just wants to use me as a punching bag for their non-vegan excuses. You know, I want to move on. I want to talk to somebody. I want my work to be effective. I want to talk to somebody who's actually going to listen. And that many times can be the best message that you send to that person when you say, look, this is going around in circles. I'd rather move on to someone else. Let's wrap this up. You know, that message they get from that is, oh, this is okay. There's a group of people out there that actually take it that seriously, that they're not willing to engage in my bullshit. Any other questions?
Do you support us taking this direct approach everywhere in our life, or just when we're doing the anonymous, the voiceless action?
Well, obviously, there are nuances that we need to take into account. I wouldn't walk into your workplace and hold your boss accountable. Like, we're going to get fired if that happens. You have to understand at a cube, we only speak with people who stop, and we also ask them, would you like to know why we're here? Have you seen this kind of footage before? We want an affirmative answer from them so that we can proceed with the interaction. So you wouldn't just do this willy-nilly with anybody, but the foundations of what I'm teaching you apply in all conversations. It may not be the same questions in all cases, but in essence, the foundation applies.
So if we were to be doing anonymous for the voiceless, taking the animal rights approach, and then also in our life in another area we were targeting, doing some environmental activism, is that fine, or do you think that we should be spending less time on that and just going with the animal rights?
Of course it's fine. What kind of a monster would I be if I was to not allow you to do activism with us if you're also an environmentalist? I would have to be an insane person.
If your environmental action was just targeting the animal agricultural and food related and fabric related parts, would you not like that being classed as vegan activism?
That's a good question. Yeah, I wouldn't call it vegan activism. You're talking about environmental issues. That's environmentalism. That's the word for that cause, environmentalism. Vegan, that word vegan is the only word that the animals have. It's the only one that belongs to non-human animals. So I'm of the belief that non-human animals should have a cause dedicated to them, that they deserve that. Does that answer your question?
Crazy question. If you were vegan, then you went and ate a human, would you class yourself as vegan still?
I didn't catch that. I didn't catch that. Sorry. Could you ask me that again?
So you're basically eating no animal product, no non-human animal product, and then you go and eat a human.
Yep.
With a vegan.
Who's doing that? Do you know someone that's doing that?
No.
While you're trapped on a deserted island.
That is a deserted island question.
But isn't it funny, the deserted island, if you're on a deserted island with another human and a pig, of course it's going to be, are you going to eat the pig? There's never a question about, are you going to eat the human you're on the island with?
Look, I think I understand your question, and I'm happy to answer it as best as I know how. This doesn't ever break. Veganism is for non-human animals. If you're vegan and you're eating humans, you're a vegan who's also a cannibal. I do believe that you can be vegan while committing human rights injustices.
Yeah, I think I like the sentence that you said. I think this brings closure to my question about the definition about veganism. And you say that vegan is the only word that the animals have for themselves. So this makes perfect sense. And yeah, I wasn't trying to undermine the effort of AV. I was just trying to have arguments to answer all these questions that pop up online that people might have when we're doing outreach. They might say, yeah, but you're not addressing this. And it's like, yeah, that's a good sentence.
Okay, no worries. No, look, I appreciate that you're exploring this, and I know that sometimes it can get a bit confusing, but yeah, I hope that I've addressed it for you. Does anybody else have any questions?
Relating to outreach. Is the cake waiting?
Yeah.
All right, well, we can wrap this up then, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Cheers, guys. Yeah, thank you, guys. I appreciate this opportunity for, doing this workshop in a concise way for people. I'm going to upload this online. So thank you for, again, giving me the opportunity to do this. Dom, thank you so much for inviting me to do this. You guys seem like a cool crew. Maybe one day in the future, I'll come out to New Zealand like I was planning to do before COVID, and I'll get to do a cube with you guys in the flesh, and we'll do a workshop again in the flesh as well. I'm constantly working on this approach to refine it. Every year, I'm constantly working to improve it. And so when I do come to NZ, I'll have a more refined approach for you guys.
Awesome.
Right.
Look forward to it.
Right.
Thank you, Paul.
Much respect, guys.
All right, take it easy. Stay with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See ya.